guys, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. We're being told over and over and over again that we're trying to get rid of books like I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings or Huck Finn. That's not what's going on. And I thought that it would be great to have a conversation with somebody who's actually in the midst of it right now. So welcome, Bruce.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi. So just let's just dive in.
Um, I have taken charge of challenging the books in my community in Clay County in Florida. Here in Florida, we have a better legislative environment than the one I left behind in New York. We fled New York. My family and I left New York about a year ago, a little more, to, well, there were a number of reasons. They centered around my wife's career. That aside, in the educational department, back in New York, in kindergarten and first grade, the top rated, A rated public school system of my hometown did considerable harm to my boy between kindergarten and the end of first grade. We pulled him out. He had a considerable number of years of therapy to recover from the damage done in first grade. And we got him into an evangelical school where he thrived and led the universe with his brightness and brilliance and became the good young man we wanted him to be in the first place. When we left New York, we decided that he was sturdy enough, he had a good foundation, and that he would survive the last 3 years of public school education here in Florida, which we believed was favorable. I still believe that, just less so than when we started. He's fine. His foundation is fine. He's a good young man, bright and gifted. And he'll take full advantage of all the good opportunities and knows how to avoid the bad stuff. Um, we sent letters in to the school system administration to keep him out of things that were unsavory by our standard. In June of last year, some associates, local people, activists, they asked me to read the pornographic content of a couple of books at a school board meeting to help bring attention to it. Everyone in this crowd was too shy or had other reasons for resisting being the face of that effort. I came from New York. I brought my thick skin with me. I like to think that I am pre-disastered as a result of my own public school education and my own upbringing. It's very hard to offend me. It's difficult to shock me. And I already knew that there were bad books polluting every library, not just the public schools. So I got up, I started to read. The lawyer immediately turned off my microphone. The little clip of that activity went viral on Libs of TikTok, which I had never heard of before. And here we are. So since that date in June, I have challenged over 400 individual texts from our public school. I
Wow.
have been a party to or associated with the removals, permanent removals of 97 titles. They're gone. They're not coming back. They've been identified as having violated law. My efforts started with trying to just bring attention to the problem. And then what happened was a lot of really progressive, ghastly pushback. There was contrary press. I was bashed here and there. People called me names. Okay, it's not the last time people called you names. That means you stood up for something. I was concerned that it would be difficult to rally a troop together after all of the negative press that I received. So I told everyone, you work behind the scenes. The only name that goes in on this paperwork is mine. The only face that's associated with it is mine. They've already smashed me and my reputation to the best of their ability, and I'm still going full speed ahead. They can cause you no harm because your name will not appear. So the way it works now is people all over the nation are reading these terrible books. I have a list. I'll share the website with you later of over 4,000 titles. The list is comprised not of books that I know are bad, but books that somewhere somebody in America challenged them or flagged them for concerning content. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be removed from all the schools. It does mean that if we're going to attack this problem, those are the ones we should read first.
Yeah.
So the problem is there are groups everywhere. You're familiar with many of them. You have book looks and rated books. and a number of localized state and county groups throughout the nation. Everybody has a little list of books that concern them. I'm sure by now most of your listeners have heard of Gender Queer, that particular graphic novel, which is porn. I recognized that there were 200 or more individual reports on just how bad that book is. Meanwhile, 199 of those people could have read another book and helped fix the problem on a bigger level. So I took on the role of master of ceremonies. I'm the MC for all the list people. If you have a list, send it to me. I will absorb it into my list. I'm going to tell you now, and I'll remind you later. My email address is Bruce, Bruce, Friedman, Fried, like fried man, at noleftturn.us. Stop with your little lists. Make it my problem. I've already handled everyone I could find, including those provided by our intellectual opponents, PEN America and the American Library Association. They keep pretty good records. I've absorbed them. When there's a title that ALA is screaming that, oh my God, people are challenging this book, it goes on my list. We'll figure out whether it was worthy of a challenge later. I will get copies of the relevant icky pages and I will convert that into a proper challenge and submit it in my name locally and then upload it to my list, which goes on the internet. I'll share that later. And then nationally, no one else has to read that horrible book again. That has resulted in, so far, the acknowledgement of 404 challenges. I'll be delivering about 50 more tomorrow at the next board meeting. The school district has no money. This is an unfunded mandate to clean up the library. Because it's unfunded, they don't care. School systems operate, they chase the almighty dollar. Children are way down low on their priorities list.
Yeah.
So how do I get the libraries clean without challenging every single book in their library that deserves it? I don't know, but I'm working it top down through the legislature and bottom up through the local community, and we'll see what works. Clay County is in first place in Florida for the county with the most challenges. We are in first place for Florida for the county with the most removed titles.
It's so surprising. Utah, we moved here for the same reason. We thought that moving here we would shelter our kid. But I'm wondering a few things. One, you use the term icky parts, and you said that these books are porn. A lot of people will say they aren't porn because they don't have pictures. How do you define icky?
Because I rely on others, I have to rely on their having been brought up with the idea that the innocence of a child is something worth preserving. If they have a moral code to that extent and they review one book, from what they send me, I can tell if I can rely on their judgment. Some people are overwhelmed with the task and they send me pictures of pages that might have the word, I'm going to say bad words, you have editing capacity.
I do. Hmm.
Okay. In this case, I'll just say the S word.
Okay.
Everybody knows that one, right?
Hmm.
So if the page has the S word on it, is that a disqualifying item? Well, it might be in a kindergarten class, but it's certainly not in a high school. And most reasonable adults with a moral code would agree on that. I have seen things that violate the law. The 97 books that are gone here in Clay County violate the law. That is, they appeal to prurient interests, that they are in some way titillating. That's not the issue. The question is it likely to take a child off the path of innocence? And so that one's a lower bar, right? Some people aren't excited by anything and don't believe anything's porn. The people you discussed that don't think it's porn because it's not a picture, those people should be kept away from children. They're a danger to themselves and everyone near them. If you can't draw a line between appropriate and inappropriate, then you shouldn't be trusted with children.
Well, I think one of the points that I often make is that there are several porn sites that have literary sections, and they write literary sections because they can write way worse than what you can watch. The things that they write about are not things that you um not things that you can film without going to prison. So,
I was exposed to adult entertainment at a very young age. I'm an old man. There were less rules back then. The uh, the impact of that was substantial. I didn't really recognize it until I reached maybe my 30s. I had already been steered to an unpleasant path by the exposure to these things. Now that I have a 16-year-old son, it's a very different perspective on the same material. When I was a little boy, send it along. I couldn't wait to absorb the next peculiar, shocking thing. As an adult male trying to protect my child's innocence, it's different.
right.
It's so different that it ought to be standards based. There is a community in Texas called Keller. The independent school district of Keller is roughly as conservative as the one I live in here in Florida. Keller came up with a very carefully crafted rubric for determining appropriateness. One of the aspects of is that there can be, for example, absolutely no profanity in any book prior to seventh grade. Additional part of that rubric is that there can be no kissing in any book or description of kissing with words unless it's among family members until after third grade. Second graders don't need a romance section in their library. They're supposed to be innocent children. Romance will come when it's time. It's being thrust upon them, and we have to stop it. That would be my version of what's icky. So, other things that are concerning. You mentioned critical race theory. In my experience, since I've been fighting Common Core for a dozen years, Common Core paved the road that took us to the Marxist efforts of critical race theory. Critical race theory is a failed theory. Anti racism is racism. There is no benefit to any child that comes from CRT. And in my opinion, CRT is the absolute worst aspect of any curriculum ever presented to an American student in my entire experience. I was worried about it. I decided I needed to be better informed. We come from the knowledge is power family tree. So I'm a student by nature. I'm very thorough. When I realized this was coming up, I took the online Coursera course under an assumed name as if I was going to be required to teach critical race theory. I studied the most scholarly text on the subject I could find, prepared by Richard Delgado and his wife, Stefancic. That CRT third edition book had a tremendous amount of valuable footnotes and gave me a lot more information about the origins of the theory, the 1930s, the Marxist school, the Frankfurt School. Um, I am more prepared to discuss critical race theory than most humans and most teachers in that regard. So when people come at me and say, number one, the thing you'll hear most often is, we don't teach critical race theory. Well, that's a big fat lie. And you can define it by its content. If you see things like black victimhood, white privilege, F the police, intersectionality, and so forth, those aspects of the CRT curriculum are embedded in any number, hundreds of books in our public school, even here in this conservative community. Now, if the darker skinned people in this community want to teach their children to use caution around the police because they are more likely to face harm if they don't, I don't see a problem with that. If there was a class being taught on how not to get shot by the police, I would approve of such a class in our curriculum for everyone of every color. You learn to say yes, sir, no, sir, and I'd like to speak with my lawyer, sir, and everyone goes home alive. Every dreadful story we hear about a police shooting of an unarmed black man, for example, because those are the most provocative of the stories. They get the most attention. Every Trayvon, all of them were people who first were involved in probable criminal activity, alleged criminal activity, and second, who resisted arrest.
That's my problem. I have such a hard time with this because I feel like the animalizing, I know that's not a word, but that's what it feels like to me, is that African Americans were targeted to become animalistic or to portray themselves in a way that does not have to be respectful. Another term that people use, and I'm going to use it, and savagery. And it seems like it was intentional because that is not the way African Americans were before, say, the 1930s. African Americans were extremely respectful, extremely put together, maybe even too respectful. Some might say that as a precursor from having been in slavery, they're more respectful. But what we're seeing now, all the highlights, they're so disparaging, and people are mistaking that for being empowering. So that's been my problem with a lot of these books, is that a lot of people will say, we need these books in our schools because these are what Black people relate to. And it's so racist and it's so offensive, even if that is how you relate to people. Or right now, again, I'm in Utah of all places. Okay. I am in rural Utah, and the director of education has said that we need books with sex with teenagers, or sex with teenagers having sex with adults in our schools, because it's happening and the kids need to reflect. And I don't care if it's true. Why wouldn't we want to have books that inspire greatness in our kids?
Thank you. You are what you eat, so you eat well. You are what you read, so you read well. It's not rocket science. We had librarians when we were kids. They would never have brought these things to us.
Right.
They would have, honestly, in my youth, a teacher or any adult that presented a child with this material would have been tarred and feathered. It would have been their last day on the job. There would be no public discussion, no debate, no committees formed, no review, no subject to secondary level analysis from the legislature. Just gone. You're out of here. And now these things are placed in front of everyone. Why? Because they're available on the internet, and that's some kind of excuse. Well, I got a 16-year-old boy. He's a good boy. He's earned my trust. If I felt that he hadn't, his cell phone is no longer his cell phone. I changed the Wi Fi password. I send a letter to his school denying him access to the internet. I'll do whatever I have to do until that trust is restored. And in the case of a public school library, most parents don't recognize they have that level of empowerment, but I have forbidden my son from using his own high school library. I have plenty of books in my own house. He can open any one of them and come away with the soul in the same general condition as when he started. That's my job, to protect him from unnecessary harm.
Right. And that's one of the things they use a lot, is that we cause harm by not allowing them to experience all of these things. But there's a there's a time and a place, and the time to experience, if that's the track that you're on, there's a reason we're considered adults. Kids do need to be sheltered, and they do need to be protected, and the people who protect them should be their parents. I have a question for you. Usually it's moms who are standing up. So what made you, as a dad, decide to stand up?
The very first time anyone in my family stood up was over 10 years ago at a board meeting in New York, where my wife got up. She is, as much as any of us are comfortable public speaking, she is less so. And she cried her way through her own prepared speech, which, by the way, was very powerful. If you're going to do public speaking and you're terrified, you go right ahead and cry, because that will carry weight. I'm a largely emotionless thug. And so I felt that it was my responsibility as the man of the house to see to it that I never saw her cry like that again. And I took on the public speaking role from that point forward. She only had to do that one meeting. And from then on, she's behind the scenes, nodding supportingly whenever possible. We don't always agree ourselves. That's life. In Smithtown on Long Island, a 300-year-old town named after a Smith. It's a very white place. I used to refer to it. I have a multicultural family. Some people are lighter than me, and some are darker than you, and none of that matters at all. The issue in Smithtown was it's a 300-year-old, clean, white, boring town where everyone goes to bed at 9 o'clock and all the lawns are shiny and new. That's the way it was. And I grew up, a lot of my life was in Smith. The aspect of white culture, if there is something that can be hammered out that way, when people talk about white and black culture, I think of Tupac and Lawrence Welk. Right now, both of those extremes don't fit me, and I'm not happy in either environment. But there is something to be said for a more white culture and a more black culture. That aside, my tastes lean a little bit more to the black side. I'm an Ella Fitzgerald fan.
Okay.
So we get through life with the things we've been exposed to, and we find the things that bring us joy. And if for some reason you find joy in reading porn, some adult did you wrong. Or if you find joy in reading anti-government, anti-police, anti-white propaganda, again, I feel someone did you wrong. And so, as much as possible within the confines of the law and community standards, which is a moving target, I'm trying to clean up the local library as an example to the state and let the state serve as an example to the nation. But we're just beginning. I've only been on this battle since July, basically, here in Florida.
So you are
And there's
actually going after the public libriaries,
I'm
not just the
avoiding
school
that. I
libraries?
have associates that are, but I
Okay.
recognize as heavy a lift as I have in the school libraries, the public libraries are going to have to wait. If we can prove that X number of books, the 97 in question here, we can prove they're gone because they're porn, then someone in a better position with better lawyers could sit down with representatives of the ALA and start to chip away at their impenetrable armor there.
You
But all
saw that
these,
you've seen the president of the ALA's post about being elected, right? How she's a Marxist and she's going to change the world and she's so excited about that.
she's been largely effective.
And that's what I was wondering. Like, when did this all start happening? I used to volunteer in my son's library, and it was not the case. In fact, it would have been a situation where if half of these books came in, we would have went, "Whoa, what is that?" Put it on a shelf. And I'm not talking about religious people. I'm just people would have never allowed this in school 3 years ago. So did this all come in with her?
No,
Okay.
no, this has been a century in the making, literally from the birth of the, even before the Frankfurt School, you had the Prussian model. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that
A
regarding
little bit,
education,
yes.
but educated people tend to travel in intellectual circles and lean more progressive or lean more anti conservative. And the way you do that, demonstrate that, is entertain thoughts that were otherwise dismissed for good reason or bad, but you run them through some kind of intellectual sieve and you make your own intellectual decision. That's fine. My librarian in second grade, rest in peace, I love Miss Virginia Deweese. Remember her like it was yesterday. She was the first person on earth I met who called herself Ms. We're going back to 1973. People didn't use Ms. particularly often then. And as the first one I met, I thought there was something special about that. And I was drawn to it. And I'm a bibliophile. I was drawn to libraries anyway. Besides these horrible books, I actually like reading good books. Um, haven't done much of that lately. So Ms. Dewey's recognized the kind of a child that I was, curious and determined and voracious with regards to reading. And she waived all of the library's policies regarding age appropriateness and how many books you could take home at one time. And over the course of my elementary school years, I read hundreds of books in her library. That's instead of being social, which is another story. So Ms. Dewey and I bonded over the next few years before I moved on to the next school. And I learned to love books and love libraries and love librarians. And so here I find myself with very different kind of people. So what changed in the last 50 years between then and now? Well, the progressive nature of each individual librarian was reinforced by the ALA and other entities involved in training them to do their job. And many of them abandoned conservatism entirely along the way. That was reinforced by peer pressure in their own organizations. If you're a Marxist in the ALA, your friends are patting you on the back. If you come to an ALA meeting wearing a Fidel Castro or Che Guevara shirt, no one questions your judgment. But I do.
Right.
These are murderers, these are monsters, and there's been considerable harm caused to humanity as a whole by pushing the same paradigms they did. What good has come from communism on this earth in the last 100 years? Something like 60 million dead. Will we please stop heading in that direction? This is a Article 4, Section 4, U.S. Constitution guarantees the right of a republican form of government. We're not a democracy. We're not socialist. We don't want to be commies. We fought them every step of the way. It's time to acknowledge that. And libraries should be stocked with things that are maybe not contrary to that. So, for example, I happen to have been born with male parts and male chromosomes. Some people discuss that as an unfortunate binary choice, but there is no choice. Our creator had a choice. Our mother didn't, our father didn't. The happy egg and the happy sperm that met somewhere in between, it wasn't their choice. Our creator chose what we would represent on this earth in his image. Separate from my faith, I happen to be Jewish. I personally believe that the reason why we have an X or a Y and then another X chromosome is because that's part of God's grand design. And it's okay to respect that. And since in Florida, for example, in the health curriculum, we are directed to teach the benefits of abstinence to school children and further to teach the benefits of monogamous heterosexual marriage. Why do we have 2,000 books out of the 100,000 in my community that are in conflict with that? They promote premarital and postmarital promiscuity and fluid gender. Gender is not fluid. Your feelings don't change your chromosomes or what's in your underwear. None of those changes that come with chemicals or surgery are recommended. A book that promotes such a thing doesn't belong near an innocent child. So this is all common sense to a conservative human and a threat to society and humanity to an ALA member. So naturally, we're going to butt heads. You'll find some people that are looking for common ground, middle ground. On a religious level, what is the common ground between good and evil?
Yeah, there isn't.
There isn't any. And
There
so we should stop looking for it.
That's the thing, is that we always say that I would do anything for my child, over my dead body was a phrase we used to use. And now we're like, oh my gosh, someone might say something mean about me. And you just go, it is your child who very well may be having themselves having parts of their body removed.
You let
It's
the librarians touch the kids, you're letting them cut branches off your own family tree.
oh, it's so this happened, the Prussian model. I thought it was not Marcuse, Gramsci. Gramsci is the one who brought sex into schools, isn't he?
There's always been an appeal to prurient interests, and sex has always sold. Books that are showing up in our libraries that do appeal to prurient interests, they've been working their way in for a century, and they existed long before. But prior to, say, the last 30 years, the people that were coming out of the American Library Association knew better than to challenge the community standards and try to push the envelope. Right now, they've felt fully empowered and they don't care. If you call a librarian a groomer, they're offended. If you identify something they did, like present porn to a child, that qualifies them as a groomer, they will dismiss and bash you endlessly. So you either stand up and take the bashing or you let your children be groomed. Those are your choices. That's where you can't find middle ground. It's not there.
Right. Yeah, in Utah, there's a lot of just be nice, be the peacemaker. And there's no other way. I don't go in with a pitchfork. I don't do that. I walk in and I'm very calm. I'm very just whenever I present to the school board, I kind of try to channel the civil rights movement and think about how like they were trained. They were literally trained to go in and to be as professional as possible and to be as informed as possible, because if you slip up, they will hold you to the fire. So if you say the wrong thing, and even if you don't say the wrong thing, if they have a way to gaslight you, they're going to do it. And it is interesting that so many people will not stand up And I just wonder, are they demoralized? Because I guess I'm an idealist, but I have a really hard time believing that people behind closed doors are going along with this.
As we got older, couches got bigger and wider and softer, and they came with cup holders and remote caddies. And as the world progresses, lethargy is the more natural state. People find themselves permanently on a couch. Even emotionally, they are couched from the harsh realities around them. So, how do you get people up and active to protect their own young? You light their couches on fire, call out the porn in their children's hands, you identify groomers, you name them and shame them. It's an unpleasant job. It comes with numerous drawbacks like the pushback that comes from an organized media that wants the opposite goal. It's the only way. We have to take the heat to protect our young. It's our job.
Do you run No Left Turn then? Or is that your organization?
I was the chapter president in New York. I passed the baton to another New Yorker. I've been here so long, and now I'm the chapter president in Florida. So my team, which in Florida is probably under 300 members right now, the whole state, is the people who will get off the couch. That's who I want to attract. The people that nod and approve and smile and pat you on the back and say thank you and go back to their couches are of no use to me. I don't need any more nodding and approving. I want action. I want people with integrity and honor to stand up and demonstrate what it looks like when you have integrity and honor. My boy's already finished 10th grade almost. It'll be done in a month. In 2 years, I will not be done reviewing 4,000 books. I'm good. I'm not that good. I've got help, not that much help. Mostly the problem is I need more ink. Like I have consistently consumed 5 to 10,000 pieces of copy paper a month in pursuit of this goal to get rid of less than 100 books.
Well, the one you sent me about the playbook, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but the something playbook. And everybody was told that it was about 12th Night reinvented, or the movie She's the Man reinvented with a trans lead. I was
The Passing Playbook, is
The
that the one?
Passing Playbook.
Okay, I have a lot of titles in my head. It took me a while. Sorry.
Yes, the Passing Playbook. That one got me so that I couldn't sleep that night. And not because, at least what I saw wasn't graphic, but what I saw was basically Planned Parenthood's guide on how to transition and what you should think about your parents, jammed in the pages of what looks like a harmless book. It said, your family is intolerant, they're bigots, you need a new community, this is how you get hormones, and this is what it's like to have your breasts cut off. And
I just looked at the report I sent you so I could refresh my memory. And yeah, it's horrible, but I've seen much worse.
Yes, but that's my point is that this, how many books are they taking that should be harmless? Like there are books like Stealing Heaven, where the girl's 16 years old and she walks out of the room and she's just had sex, and her mother says, did he treat you right? And she has just slept with her mother's boyfriend, and her
I
mother's
read that
perfectly fine
recently.
with it. Her mother's perfectly fine with it. And so are parents, because when you don't say no, or when you assume it's not my child, oh well, my neighbor's child, they might get involved with this and we'll be supportive and kind because it's the right thing to do, but it'll never be my child. People need to listen. The CDC just came out and said 1 in 4 in high school, 1 in 4 kids identifies as queer today. This is not
Not homeschoolers,
yeah, no.
right? You notice that grown-ups, parents, loving parents, if their kid says, if their female child says, Mommy, I'm a boy, they say, No, you're a girl. And if you're
Yeah,
confused, look in your underwear.
it's true. It's true, but the thing is that these kids are being used. I will defend the individual's right to be an individual of a certain age, not the child, because the child, that is on their parents. The responsibility to raise that child is on their parents. But when they become a certain age, people are going to make their mistakes, and I'm going to feel really bad for them if they make a mistake because they're led down a road. But when you're doing it with kids, that's different. Inundating our schools with these is different than even the public library. I personally would not touch the public library. I wouldn't. I just think that you're asking for fire and brimstone, because that's a person's right and that's their family's right. The same thing with go and get your books on Amazon if you want them. But in a school, there's a responsibility to protect
The
kids.
most innocent child that walks the halls will have access to every book in that school. No book
Right.
should be in that school that is a threat to that imaginary most innocent child.
Yes. Yes. And that's where we're at, and why we
You
would.
have the bright line law in Utah. How is that working out?
Here's what happens. We get an administrator who chooses their team. So we may have had legislation that has said, um, you have to have a team that reviews these books. Okay, that's fine until the activist teacher decides to get on the board and to bring all the people of her supporters on that board of looking at the books. So then every single book is retained.
Same here, by the way. We call it the district community council. It might as well be an ALA meeting.
Exactly.
Florida, we don't have the bright line rule, Carrie. We have called training for media specialists. It includes a phrase I was able to shoehorn in within the last 6 months, which is err on the side of caution. It's great, but it has no legal teeth. And
Right.
librarians, ALA librarians in particular, they don't have caution. So telling them to err on the side of caution is like telling them to ignore you. They will ignore you. So
Well,
how
and
do I
having
make
teeth in Utah is just that's funny because Utah is known for being kind. We don't make waves. We're never troublemakers. And meanwhile, people are carrying signs that say good trouble. And they're very much activists, and BYU professors are teaching things that make no sense within the Mormon culture, which I'm not LDS, but within that culture, they make no sense. And they're allowed to teach these things. And if you say something, well, you're intolerant. And what would Jesus do? I'll tell you what Jesus would do. He would take a whip and he'd destroy the freaking temple.
he
That's what
flipped
he
some
would do.
tables for sure?
I'm like, it's so frustrating. It is so frustrating because I'm like, do we read the same books? Because I guess we don't. Because um there's a point where, and it's so funny because on the left they say don't be tolerant of the intolerant. Meanwhile, on the right, the people who call themselves conservatives but aren't, and I do believe there's a strong difference between conservatives and Republicans today. And so the Republicans will say, well, they're just a bunch of troublemakers. They incite things. And I'm like, I'm not inciting anything by saying keep your hands off my kid.
No.
That shouldn't be
And if
inciting.
I am, then so be it. If we have to burn bridges, I'll bring matches.
Exactly. Exactly. I wish we could figure out what the missing piece is to wake people up. And I want it to be before the problems are in their own homes, because that tends to be what happens. Nobody pays attention until a couple of months later, and then they're in their own homes.
One lady in my community, Carrie, there was a 12-year-old girl who attempted suicide twice after meeting with her guidance counselor. The guidance counselor suggested that she needed new pronouns and a boy's name. The guidance counselor was trained by the Department of Education, following guidelines, fully supported by the American Psychological Association, the AMA. Sure, the librarians would have nodded approvingly. This girl attempted suicide twice in the school before the school reached out to tell the parents about it at all. Of course, there's a monstrous pending lawsuit, and thankfully, this girl didn't cause herself lasting permanent damage. But there's been no change in staffing. That guidance counselor hasn't been retrained. She's still employed, still having the same kind of access to the same impressionable young children with extraordinary emotional needs. So they show up in need.
They prey on the vulnerable. It's really hard to be calm and cool and collected when you know that they're preying on the vulnerable. They prey on the autistic community. The proof is there. You can go to the American School Counselors Association and see what they're looking for. They are looking for vulnerable people. And then they turn them into the water carriers for this whole mess. And that's the whole point. The point is less kids. The point is to destroy families. That is the point. So when you go and you have a target being a parent who speaks out, but then so does your child. Well, and I just thought, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, whether or not I feel safe, the opportunity to go to a private school and get, that kind of an education, stop worrying about feeling safe and instead start grabbing the opportunities that are in front of you and just kind of pushing the garbage to the side. But we're not pushing the garbage to the side. We're sitting down and saying, well, I just want to make sure that you feel like you're being heard. And I just want to make sure that your feelings, your feelings, your feelings. And you just sit there going, no, push the
No.
obstacles out of your way and accomplish something. Don't you think safety should be a priority? No, I don't. Yes, literal safety. I would prefer not to get shot, you know?
The private school you're being given a scholarship to has a history of sponsoring KKK meetings. I can understand your concerns. Otherwise, climb over the obvious obstacles, maybe being the only dark skinned person in a white crowd.
Can I be real about that? When you are like in a place like Utah, they bend over backwards to make sure you feel comfortable. Bend over backwards. You and sometimes become the token. That's the reality. That's just a fact. So what obstacle?
I seem to be the only Jewish guy in my town, so I understand a little. All right, I want to show you a couple of things before we end this
Yeah,
little
absolutely.
adventure.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm gonna I'm gonna take you for a little tour. I'm a math guy. Meanwhile, all of that has been pushed aside as I've spent much of the last year writing book reports.
Oh my gosh.
That is the information on the 2,000 out of 4,000 titles that are found in my community that are known to be problematic. I don't know exactly what's wrong with them until I read them, but that's what I do. I assign them to people and I read as many as I can, and I'm cranking out reports between 30 and 50 a month. And I'm finding new titles challenged elsewhere at the same time. So that list that I'm going to show you, if I can share my screen, that would
Yeah,
probably be better.
absolutely.
That list grows probably by more books than I can report on every single month because
You
they're
can
being published in great quantities. There's an active effort from the publishers, in particular Scholastic and HarperCollins, if I could call out some of the bad guys. Um, they are directing their authors to crank things out that support SEL, CRT, DEI, and so forth, just like
yeah,
they did with Common Core a dozen years ago. Let's see,
yeah.
share screen. Let's see
So
what happens.
what are the steps in which we could actually win, in which you could see this world turning into something different than the mess it is right now?
One of the easy answers would be to empty the public schools. Everybody keep your kids home. It doesn't have to be every day until forever. It could be one day a week until we get the attention of people that are worth getting the attention of, like the governor, the education commissioner. The principals and the superintendents and all their lawyers and all these other entities are so incestuously involved. There's so much nepotism and layering of their overlapped authorities that it doesn't even pay to talk to any of them. I show up at board meetings as a courtesy and to have an opportunity to deliver. Here's my here's what I'm delivering tomorrow. This is 50 or so reports on books. More than half of them are pornographic, and more than half of them from that pile will probably go back on the shelves because they're not pornographic enough for immediate action. So all of this is kind of like a predictable failure. How do we win? There was a school, I believe it was Detroit, but back before the Civil Rights Act or just thereafter when there was efforts to desegregate or integrate the schools in the North. Um, I think they called it Black Mondays. And the Black communities, largely 100% Black at the time, so we'll even use the word ghetto, right? The impoverished attitudes and those neighborhoods, they agreed that they needed better funding, better schools, better books, better whatever, and that to get that to happen, they were going to hold their kids out of school every Monday until forever, until things improved. It took them about 10 weeks before all of a sudden there was action. So if the impoverished Black community, as disorganized and disempowered as it was around that time, could accomplish the goal, then an organized adult community of people of every color could do the same thing everywhere right now. With that in mind, as you know, people are not going to participate. They're too comfortable on their couches. They're too afraid of negative press. They're too entrenched with some of the entities that are working against them. Some of them work in the school. How do you fight the school when you work in the school? You'll never get another raise, another promotion, another opportunity. People that are politically minded will play hot potato with people like you and I because just talking to us is a threat to their future. The website I'm showing you a kind of a piece of right now is my compiled list. And it's compiled by gathering everyone else's list and participating in some unusual groups. Someone took my business card, took my email address, and signed me up to be a member of the transgender community. They did it as a lark. They did it to upset me. As it turns out, within that group, there are frequent discussions about which books most often support their paradigm. I stayed a member of that group and I poached those book lists and add them to my own. Not because I hate transgender people. I happen to have a transgender nephew who's now solidly convinced he's my niece and has changed to a female name legally and grown breasts and. God bless you. You're a grown up. You made your grown up decision. It's too late for me to have an influence on that. But I'll never call you a woman because you're not. And then the question comes up, let's say I'm out with that particular person. If they have to go to the bathroom, who am I there to defend?
Mm.
Right? My nephew, who now is convinced he's my niece, wants to go to the ladies' room, is wearing a dress, has breasts, presents as a woman more or less. If a guy was beating him up because his daughter was in that girl's room, right? Some man standing outside the girl's room waiting for his daughter decides to beat up my former nephew. Whose side am I on? I'm actually torn. I don't know. But that kind of chaos, crumbling of society and the boundaries between the binary world we ought to live in and the world they have in store for us, it's going to cause a lot more battles. It's designed to. And much like critical race theory, there will be nothing but a river of blood if you let it run free. So we have a responsibility to stop it. So I'm just going to scroll down real quick on this list to show you what goes on with this list. I've color coded the books that I've made an effort to get out of my community that have made it through process to some extent. So the green ones, they're gone. Those are my 97 victories. The orange ones are in some kind of limbo, and the red ones are failures. They keep changing the rules here. They've actually made 3 policy revisions since June to try and slow me down. It's not working, but it's about to actually have their desired impact. So
Okay.
we have the book 50 Shades of Grey, but it's clearly a book written for adults. Somebody put it in a high school or elsewhere, but I haven't figured out where. But that somebody wrote a report on it. So that puts the book on my list, and their report is linked through the title on my list. And should anyone else find that horrible book in their public schools, they can click on it, copy the report, attach their local cover pages, and challenge it locally. No one has to read the horrible book again. That's how we conserve momentum. That's how we can win. We need to overwhelm every community from here to Timbuktu with book challenges until they grow up.
Hmm.
Will it work? I don't know, but that's all I can think to do.
And at least
And
it's something.
it is
I mean,
something.
I think that's how we stop from becoming demoralized is by doing something. So, okay, let's wrap this one up and then let's have more discussions. That'd be great.
Works for me. Have a beautiful day.
You too. All right, bye.